let's talk about hypertexts. I'm sure most of you are aware of hyperlinks. These are words, phrases, I guess, in an email or a document that, when clicked, send you to another document or web page or something like that. Hypertexts are similar. They're a work that derives from, alludes to, or reconstructs another work. And it's not just commentary or influence either. See, commentary is a work that directly, comments on another. One of the most famous forms of commentary is biblical commentary. So you'll have a work that is directly commenting on, let's say, the Gospel of Luke. Its entire existence is just to take passages from Luke and, comment on them. It's also not influence, because you're usually influenced by ideas, generalities, right? Someone might be influenced by ideas in Plato, but they're not usually reconstructing the Republic or putting it into a new form. That's what a hypertext does. One of the most famous examples of a hypertext is that modernist masterpiece, Ulysses, by James Joyce. It's one of my favorite novels, and in my opinion, one of the greatest novels ever written. This is a hypertext of the ancient Greek epic poem, the Odyssey, written by Homer, which I'm sure most of you have read in high school. Ulysses uses the same section titles that the Odyssey does, and even the title, Ulysses, is just the Roman name of the protagonist of the Odyssey, Odysseus. And just as a side note, that's where we get the word Odyssey from, meaning a journey. Ulysses isn't just a commentary of the Odyssey. It's not just influenced by the idea of a man traveling on a journey. It reconstructs the basic elements of the Odyssey and presents them as a single day in Dublin, Ireland. It uses the same themes and symbols, but might use them in different ways so that you get something that is unique but inherently tied to that earlier work. Another example of a hypertext is the French play Les Mouches, or The Flies, by Jean-Paul Sartre. Written in 1943, this play is a reimagining of Aeschylus's The Libation Bearers, a story of revenge and divine justice. In the original, on the order of the god Apollo, Orestes and his sister, Electra, which is a great name, avenge their father, who was taken out by Orestes' own mother, Clytemnestra, and her lover, Aegisthus. After their violent revenge, Orestes is chased by the Furies, goddesses of vengeance, only to be eventually acquitted, literally, of his supposed crimes by the goddess Athena. Sartre, while keeping the names of the characters, dramatically transfigures this from a play about revenge, justice, and divine intervention into one of freedom, guilt, and responsibility. In his reimagining, Orestes does not dispose of his mother out of a divine commandment or desire for revenge. Instead, he does it to free the people of Argos from their guilt. See, in the years since Agamemnon's downfall, the city has observed an annual Day of the Dead, during which dead souls supposedly arise from beyond the grave to torment those who did them wrong. The town is consumed basically by a decades-long guilt trip for the demise of Agamemnon, for which Zeus blames the citizens because they did nothing to stop it. This ritualized guilt is used by Aegisthus and Zeus to keep the citizens not only in line, but enslaved to their god-imposed fate. Orestes sees beyond this. Not only because he knows what his mother did, but because he knows that humans are free, and that in creating them, Zeus relinquished his control over them. Zeus in the play says, "Once freedom lights its beacon in a man's heart, the gods are powerless against him. It's a matter between man, and it is for other men, and for them only, to let him go his gait, or to throttle him." Zeus needs ceremonies like the Day of Mourning to convince humans that their past is set by God-given morality and intervention, rather than a reflection of responsibility and freedom that can be given meaning through future actions. The Furies, too, change from being terrifying harbingers of moral justice to irritating, persistent nuisances, like the flies which have infected the city since Agamemnon's demise and represent imposed remorse, shame, and institutional morality. The Furies become reduced to insects that swarm over humanity to compel them to guilt. After Orestes and Electra commit their act, the Furies chase them, not to dispense justice, but to torment them into feeling guilty for their actions. Again, so that they feel condemned by their past and enslaved to the fate of the gods. While Electra eventually relents and chooses to follow Zeus in order to atone for her actions, Orestes, unlike in the original play, does not repent, because he feels his action was just. He accepts responsibility for what he did, but views it as his way of taking upon himself the guilt and shame of the citizens in order to free them from their chains. For Orestes, the true crime of the citizens was not in the past events, but in their present submission to a constructed guilt. If humans are truly free and separate from the gods, then it is up to them to determine what their past means, not social pressure or divine ordinance. The past has no authority over us except that which we allow. Sartre takes this classic Greek tragedy and turns it into an existential masterpiece. Where things get interesting, though, is when we start talking about adaptations. Take, for example, 2026's Wuthering Heights, in heavy quotation marks. Ostensibly, it's just an adaptation of the classic novel by Emily Bronte. It has the same title, a lot of the characters have the same names, the geography is the same. But so much of the movie is drastically different from the source material, the character arcs, the plot lines, the relationships, that it's hard to call it a strict adaptation, much to the chagrin of many Wuthering Heights fans. Even the director herself admits that it is a very, very loose adaptation. Now, you could just say that it's a bad adaptation, and I think that's valid. In fact, I don't know if I would consider Wuthering Heights to be a hypertext despite how drastically different it is from the source material. Another controversial example, I think, is Baz Luhrmann's Romeo plus Juliet. And this one is one I struggled with, because you could consider a hypertext, I suppose, because of how drastically it reinterprets Romeo and Juliet, but I think this is much more an example of a good adaptation, because it doesn't pretend to be anything other than Romeo and Juliet. It uses the same title, the same character names, the same plot. All it does is really put it in a modern setting and include, modern tools and instruments. So I think that even that is more an example of just a good adaptation rather than a strict hypertext. But then we have something like the movie Clueless. I think this is a clear example of something that is a hypertext, in this case of the Jane Austen novel, Emma. And while they have different character names, different settings, etc., I think that if you were to place Emma on top of Clueless, you would be able, if you paid attention, to clearly trace how it's reconstructed the classic novel. I think this is the same thing that Ulysses does with the Odyssey. If you pay attention, you're able to see just how it reconstructs this classic work. And as I was reading about hypertext, reading Deleuze and Baudrillard, I had a sort of epiphany. I realized that there's a specific creator that I think does something unique with the hypertext form, basically brings the hypertext into the 21st century. That's YouTuber Flawed Peacock. Hello there, Future Priest here. I wanted to give a quick disclaimer, because I think that some people who watch this might leave with the wrong impression, especially if they know that Flawed Peacock and I are friends. So, full disclosure, Flawed Peacock did not ask me to make this video. In fact, he didn't even know I was making it until I showed him the final product. The only impetus for this video was my reading about hypertexts and then realizing that Flawed Peacock's videos offer the perfect example of hypertext in the 21st century, and that excited me. I like making videos about things that excite me. So with that in mind, I hope you enjoy the rest of the video, and remember, stay curious. For those of you who don't know, Flawed Peacock is a YouTuber who publishes video essays on independent games, films, sometimes even books. And that puts him in the good company of people like Wendigoon or PhilosophyTube. But Flawed Peacock doesn't just stop with analysis or gameplay walkthroughs. And if he did, he would be a rising star in that category. But I think he does something more than this, specifically in his inclusion of what he calls skits, dramatic enactments of a story that plays throughout the video, a sort of through line that holds the video together. And all of these things come together to create a cohesive unit that I think is truly hypertextual, at least in a unique or novel sense. See, unlike something like Wuthering Heights, his videos are not just an adaptation of the original game or book or movie. They can't exist without it, true, but they do something unique. They completely reconstruct that world into a new form of media. Yes, he does his analysis, yes, he does his gameplay walkthroughs and explanations, but he also combines skits, custom music, whiteboard segments which feature text and graphics. All of these things come together in a way that I think is quintessentially hypertextual, whereas other creators who post, say, gameplay walkthroughs will just show you the game that they're playing, and you can sort of, I suppose, play it vicariously through them. Flawed Peacock invites you into an entirely new world. The game is there, yes, but you're not just watching him play it. You're exploring it with him, living it with him. And I think that's only possible because of the way that Flawed Peacock approaches his delivery of the video. It is not just a gameplay walkthrough or analysis, it is an entirely new creation that uses that original source and reconfigures it into something completely unique and completely his own. I think this is why I consider Flawed Peacock to be a unique creator in the 21st century YouTube space. And look, I'm not trying to be obsequious here. I'm not saying that Flawed Peacock is on the same level as James Joyce or Ulysses. Not because he isn't good, but because James Joyce has a rarefied spot in the history of literature. And Flawed Peacock could achieve a similar status one day, but that's not the point. I think what Flawed Peacock is doing right now is something that few others, if any, are doing in the modern YouTube or media landscape. He's creating out of creativity. Now that's not to say that all of the skits are hypertextual, especially not the earlier ones. For example, the skits in the Who's Lila video, which also happens to be his most viewed video, seem to be more metatextual than hypertextual. They sit aside the game. They directly engage with it and its themes, but they don't reconstruct a world. It's more like they talk about the game without being inside of it. But his more recent skits, especially the ones in No I'm Not a Human, I think display an explicit hypertextuality. For example, in part 2 of the No I'm Not a Human videos, Flawed Peacock analyzes the protagonist's struggles with self-hate, feelings of failure, and regret. He then takes those analyses and applies them directly to the third skit in the same video. Not just references them, not just talks about them, but directly applies them to one of the characters in the skit, codenamed Panther. His videos on Hypnospace Outlaw also demonstrate his construction of a world out of the source material, not only in terms of themes or ideas, but in terms of aesthetics. The Hypnospace Outlaw videos actually might be some of the best examples of hypertextuality in Flawed Peacock's work. Not only because the skits offer an embodiment of the analysis of the videos, but because they create out of the game a completely new world that shares its aesthetic foundations with the source material. And this is to say nothing of all the symbols, Easter eggs, inter-video threads, and lore that Flawed Peacock includes in his skits. Together, these add another layer of hypertextuality that adds depth and color to the videos, and, I think, helps separate them from mere fan fiction. In this way, I think the skits act as a sort of backbone, or spine, for the videos. They allow all of the elements to cohere, especially the analysis. See, Flawed Peacock doesn't treat the source material as an object placed upon the shelf waiting to be analyzed. Instead, he constructs an entire world out of it that we might explore and inhabit as a complete system. The analysis finds life through the skits. The skits embody the analysis. We don't just hear about the concept of self-hatred, we see it performed for us. Even though the skits are not a part of No I'm Not a Human, they are intrinsically tied to it. In this way, I think we could even describe the videos not just as hypertextual, but as polytextual. And I know I'm using the word textual a lot. Textuality. But I think it describes the videos well. See, all of the elements in the video rely on each other, even though they have their own independent existence. The analysis relies on the skits to give it life. The skits rely on the analysis to provide context. The skits also rely on the whiteboard to provide a graphic element that the analysis can't quite capture. And all of it relies on the source material to provide the background or foundation for what develops after. I think this polytextuality is what allows the videos to explore the extremes of duration. Most of his videos are over 6 hours long, and some even go beyond 10 hours. And I don't think people are just skimming through them either. I think they're committed to watching all 10 hours. This is possible because Flawed Peacock constructs worlds out of videos, worlds that we are able to inhabit. And because he guides us through those explorations, instead of leaving us to our own devices, the videos are able to easily integrate themselves into our lives. They can exist in the background without us acknowledging the video playing on this specific computer on the counter. Just as a lamp lights up a room without us consciously being attentive to the lamp itself, the videos exist as something that we explore without necessarily acknowledging the video playing before us. This temporality allows the video to exist again in a new type of world, a world that is concurrent with ours, but that withstands any type of objectification. Of course, we can still look at the video and acknowledge it as a video if we want, but as we watch it, our consciousness is directed toward the exploration of the world rather than its existence as this video here on the internet. I think that this temporal ontology is possible largely due to the inclusion of the skits. Even if the skits weren't hypertextual, I think they would allow the video to exist as its own creation, a creation which we would be able to inhabit without necessarily watching the clock tick by. You could say that a Flawed Peacock video isn't 10 hours long, we just have 10 hours to explore this world that he presents to us. Through the synthesis of these elements, Flawed Peacock creates a new kind of hypertextuality, one that not only involves creating out of creation, but one that involves constructing an entire world through which that creation exists, a world that we are able to inhabit. Creation becomes embodied for us. In this sense, I like to think of Flawed Peacock almost as a modern Virgil, someone guiding us through new worlds we otherwise would not have known existed. Not only guides us through them, but allows us to explore them fully, to understand them. I think this is something that not a lot of people are doing today, and I think it's something that is worth getting floppy about.